So I'll just say welcome again to everybody on the web and on the phone. This talk tonight is called The Healing Power of Stillness. And I'm Laurie Snorek. I'm a Christian Science practitioner and teacher and lecturer, and I'll be with you for about an hour. This talk this evening is sponsored by Fourth Church of Christ Scientists from Tucson, Arizona. So thank you again to Fourth Church in Tucson for sponsoring this talk. And to get started, I'd like to just give you all a little piece of advice that I was given when I was in graduate school and I was studying peace building. And I was going to hear a talk by a speaker that I was really looking forward to. And my professor said to me that when I was listening to the talk, he said people are really good at paying attention to what the speaker says, but rarely do they at the same time pay attention to what their own heart is saying while they're listening. And he said to me, that's what I want you to do when you go hear the speaker this weekend. And I thought that was excellent advice. And given our topic tonight, the healing power of stillness, I'd love to give that advice to all of you as well. To just say that as you're listening to me, as I share from my own heart, my own stories, I hope that you hear your own heart speaking. And as you do, pay attention closely to that message, because that's the real message that you came here for tonight, whatever you're hearing coming up in your own heart as you're listening. So pay attention to that message primarily. All right, so this talk on stillness has been a really key part of my practice. Everything that you're going to hear tonight comes from my practice of Christian Science. I work with people who are relying on prayer for healing, and they text me, or we work over WhatsApp or over video chat or phone, or sometimes in person, depending on where we are in the world. And they're individuals who are looking for spiritual means to find healing of all sorts of things. And stillness has been an integral part of my own practice, and also the way that I share ideas with my patients and the people that I work with. And it's particularly been important to me because it's how I think healing really happens. And so we're going to talk tonight about the relationship between stillness and being still and how that relates to healing. And that will be our hour together. And to start off, there's a story that I heard years ago that has really touched me when I heard it. And you'll see on your screen, those of you who have the computer in front of you, there's a picture of a cellist. And he's sitting down in full concert dress, in formal concert dress, on a little chair in the middle of a lot of rubble. He's in the center of Sarajevo. And this cellist is the principal cellist of the Sarajevo Opera Orchestra. His name is Vedran Smilovic. And he comes into the center square of Sarajevo in 1992, and he plays his cello. And he comes not just this one time, but he comes for 22 consecutive days into the heart of the center of Sarajevo and plays his instrument. Now, why does he do this? Because he wants to commemorate the 22 men, women, and children that were killed at the start of the war. They were waiting in a bread line. And he wanted to commemorate their lives in the best way that he knew possible. And he didn't know how to broker a ceasefire between the warring factions of his city or his country, but he knew how to play his instrument. And so he went into the middle of the conflict and the struggle, and he offered a little bit of cello music for those who were listening. Now, this is a true story, and when I heard it, it just struck me, what would it take to go into the middle of this kind of a war zone where artillery shells are falling on buildings and people are running for cover and there's chaos around and all of this is happening while you're just sitting there playing cello, regardless of your own safety. And I thought to myself that it would really take a deep, settled sense of calm inside to be able to put aside your own concerns, your own challenges, and to be available, to be there supporting your community like that. And I don't know if this man had that deep, settled sense of stillness, but I think about how this also represents, for me, the importance of the topic of stillness. that sometimes we go off to a beautiful place. Like I'm actually in Bermuda right now for work, but it's an incredibly beautiful spot. I've never been here before. And there's lots of stillness in the sunsets and the ocean and just the walks along the water. And, it's just a very beautiful place. And early in the morning or late at night too with the sunset. And so sometimes we find ourselves in places like that where, maybe it's a lake or a mountaintop or some place that's beautiful. Often we relate to nature that way, but it could be anywhere. And we find that sense of stillness maybe more easily because we're in a place that is separate from our daily life, or we're taking a break, or we're on vacation, or we're really trying to kind of take a breather from the manic schedule that we have or the busyness of our lives. And those moments are useful and really helpful. And I fully think taking a break or a vacation is certainly deserved and necessary sometimes. But the challenge is to bring the stillness, the quiet, the peace that we feel in those moments back into our daily life, and to not feel like we have to escape all the time from our environment in order to find that sense of stillness. To develop a practice in the middle of the busiest day, in the middle of our busy lives or whatever we may have going on that we have to give to be able to practice stillness right in the midst of whatever might be bombarding us. Hopefully none of you are ever going to be in that situation like this cellist where there's a war bombarding us. But on any given day, what is bombarding us in our thought? Tonight, we'll look at 3 ways to find stillness. The first one being just looking at it for ourselves, that when there's things challenging us in our own thinking, that we get still and really hear the voice of God, essentially, that getting still is about communing with that voice of God, that hearing it within our own hearts and feeling the presence of God. And when we talk about God, in Christian Science, we're really emphasizing this as a power of divine love. So if you think about it as this all-encompassing power of love, as opposed to a personified image of a person somehow sort of judging it whether we're good enough, that it's an impartial power and a universal power. It doesn't matter what religion we are, what background we come from culturally or ethnically, or how much money we have in the bank, or what age we are, that this presence of love permeates everyone's heart, and that we all have the right to feel that. So that's the first step, is getting still for ourselves and feeling that presence of divine love, what that looks like for our own selves. So that's part 1. Part 2 is we'll look at how can we maintain stillness in relationships with others that might tend to be conflictual. Not that any of you have ever been in a situation where you have conflict with somebody else, but in case you ever do, we'll be looking at how do you resolve conflicts with other people, interpersonal challenges, and how does stillness help us with that? And then finally, we'll look briefly at world events and how, in light of what's going on in world events, in politics, in our own country, et cetera, how do we maintain that atmosphere, that thought, the consciousness of stillness in light of events that would try to draw us in and make us agitated or upset about what's going on in the world. So those are the 3 sections that we'll look at tonight. And to start off, I just want to bring up this idea here. There's a quote on the screen, and I'll just read it. At the center of the most turbulent heart, there is a place of peace. A place beyond time that cannot be touched by change or loss. No tumult can disturb the quietness. No shadow can dim the light. Here in this stillness is rest and healing. Nothing we suffer, nothing that we fear can damage its perfection. And I firmly believe this, that the stillness we're looking for is not outside of ourselves. It doesn't require a job change. It doesn't require us to move to a new city. It doesn't require us to change a relationship or get a relationship or find the right relationship. It doesn't require us to have a certain kind of community in our lives or anything at all, or have any kind of particular condition outside of ourselves. And that's not to devalue the communities of people in our lives that are supportive for us, the people in our lives that that are there for us, or being there for other people. Those connections are so vital. But the deepest sense of peace comes from discovering it already within our hearts. All of you already have it. That no matter how harried you may feel, no matter how busy your day was getting to this talk tonight, no matter all the things that you have to do going on this evening, this afternoon when you leave this talk, or tomorrow, or the next day when the work week starts again on Monday, whatever we have going on, it's in our busiest times that it's most important to pause and take time for stillness. And if some of you are thinking, well, I'm not that busy, actually, I feel like my life doesn't have a lot of purpose. I would love to be busier. I wish I was working full time again, or I wish I had a really fulfilling job or someplace to go on a daily basis. And I'd love to be busier. If any of you are thinking that, stillness is not a void or an emptiness. It's this deep settled peace of healing that's at the heart of each one of our being, at the heart of our being for each one of us. And it's a vibrancy. It brings life, it brings vitality, and a sense of spiritual energy, and a sense of purpose, and a sense of really responding to that divine impetus for life. And so stillness is something that, whether we need to pause because we're super busy, or whether we just need to find again that vitality, that vibrancy of living that is so clearly about our connection with God, that's what stillness gives us. Now, what does it look like? What does stillness feel like? So for me, it feels a little bit like, well, it feels like oneness to me. That stillness is about a constant conscious capacity to understand God, to feel enveloped in that presence of love. And that sometimes in the rush of our daily lives, or in all of our activities, we might somehow sort of miss that divine connection. We might be not paying attention to it, even though it's always there. That sense of stillness is always within, but we may not be taking the time to pause and really find it. And this analogy is one that just helps me remember that I'm not looking to create it or to make something happen by the way I think about things, but that stillness is about putting off sort of all of the chatter in our thoughts, so we get really quiet and tuning in to what God is saying. So you see on your screen, there's a picture of a cello, and it works for a violin too. So those of you listening on the phone, and this analogy comes from one day I was sitting in my daughter's violin lesson, and the teacher had put on the tuner, which is a pure, perfect A, I think it is actually, tone. And then my daughter played the same tone on her violin. And inevitably, as it always happens at the start of the lesson, they're out of tune. And so there was this vibration that clearly showed it was out of sync. And then there's these little black knobs on the base of a violin or a cello. And as you turn those, the instrument comes in line with that pure, perfect tone. And what's beautiful about it is that when I closed my eyes this particular day, I couldn't hear two distinct tones being played in the room. I could only hear one sound. And that sense of oneness is what stillness feels like to me. It feels like being the essence of love, being enveloped completely in our oneness with God. And I think the goal, is to feel that more frequently. And I'm working on it. It's not something we necessarily feel every single moment, but it's there for us every single moment. And sometimes the hardest part for me about finding stillness is just remembering to practice it. Just remembering, like right before I start the car or run off to work or take my daughter to school, to just kind of take a deep breath and remember to think about doing whatever I'm doing with stillness. Because sometimes what happens in life is we get caught up in thinking that we're human doings, that it's all about what we're doing. When stillness is about how we're doing what we're doing, it's how our being is engaged in what we're doing, and that is really what's what helps us to feel God's presence. And I think a good example of this actually is in America, at least. I don't know about Europe or Australia or other places, but at least in America, when I was a kid, we often got asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? But that question is not about being, right? It's about, the answers are usually like, oh, a fireman, or I want to be a librarian was my thing, or a truck driver, or whatever, whatever it might be, a deep sea diver. I don't know, all these, whatever the answers are, but they're always about what you want to do. And I recently had an acquaintance post a story on one of their social media feeds about how when they were young and the teacher said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, happy. And the teacher said, no, that's the wrong answer. No, that doesn't count. And how interesting it is that we are asking a question about being, but we want to answer it with what we do. And I think that that's this trap so often that keeps us from that oneness that we just talked about, like the violin tuning up to the pure, perfect tone. That partly why it's hard sometimes to feel that connection, that oneness, is because we're so focused on what we're doing. And we think we have to do something to feel the oneness, when in reality, it's about letting go of all the doing stuff, the doing energy, which isn't a bad thing. We need that spirit of doing and accomplishing to be able to manage our lives in a way. But when we want to feel that oneness with God, it's about the quality of our being. And that's where we can find that connection with God. So Mary Baker Eddy used this analogy as well. She talked about keeping your violin in tune. She told her students once to do that, to keep your violin always in tune, and then you won't have to tune it up. And I think that the way we do that, the way a violinist keeps it in tune, they don't just tune in the morning and then play a concert and then give a lesson and then go to a rehearsal and hope it stays in tune all day. The violinist or the cellist is accustomed to retuning throughout the day constantly. Even if they do a great job of tuning in the morning and they have a fabulous tuning session and they get perfectly in tune, they do not expect that tuning to last for the whole day. And I think it's the same with prayer for us. That sometimes in my life, at least, there's been a trap of thinking, well, if I just have a really good prayer session in the morning, it'll kind of somehow magically like last throughout the day and I'll have a great day, But sometimes it does, and then sometimes it doesn't, and I forget what I read in the morning or studied, and then I think, oh gosh, I don't remember what it was. I wake up the next day and do the whole thing over again. But what I've been realizing is the importance of connecting with those spiritual ideas throughout my day, not just at one point in the morning in this one chunk of time. That the retuning is about being conscious of our relationship to God throughout the day, practicing being still throughout the day, as opposed to just when it's quiet before my kid up in the morning. And I think that's what a violinist expects. They're listening for when they get out of tune so they can immediately tune up. And it just takes a small adjustment. And I think it's the same thing for us. As we listen, it helps us to retune in to what God is saying. And to remember, sometimes it's just a matter of remembering to do it, remembering to find stillness in our day. All right, so everything you'll hear today is based on the Bible and the book Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. Mary Baker Eddy wrote this book after she had an experience in 1866 where she was diagnosed with something incurable and read this beautiful story of Jesus healing in the Bible and was cured. And she spent the rest of her life really investigating what it meant to heal others and how to bring the healing that Jesus did to the world today. And so Christian Science is based in the Bible, first of all, and you can see on your screen now one of the keynote ideas for our talk today, which is be still and know that I am God. Now, I hope you can hear two things in there, right? The be still as the first thing, and then the know that I am God. And the be still for me is about quieting all those chattering thoughts in our heads. Sometimes that can take a good portion of time. It can just be to really quiet all those racing thoughts in our heads. And once they get quiet, then to really fill up with that sense of God. And that to me is the key to stillness in Christian Science. that it's not only about emptying out our thoughts or our thinking, but about filling up with the presence of peace and the presence of divine love, and knowing that that's what fills us and satisfies us and brings us a sense of peace in our lives, and really connecting with that sense of God. And that to do that, we have to really be understanding what that concept of God looks like and what that peace looks like. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Mary Baker Eddy's book has an idea in it that says, Spirit God is heard when the senses are silent. And so her book, Science and Health, really talks about how to put into practice the ideas from the Bible. So she's talking here about just that we hear God when our senses are quiet. We have to get all that chatter in our heads really quiet, and that's when we can hear God. Mary Baker Eddy practiced this when she wanted to revise her book, and she moved from busy Boston up to her quiet home in New Hampshire, where she could really find that sense of peace and stillness easily. She talked about finding it there in New Hampshire, but again, it was really to just focus her thought on listening and revising the book that she'd written. She thought of herself as just kind of living close to God at all times, and how she felt that presence of love. And when she would go into the closet, which of course is a passage from Jesus' direction on how to pray, he said to go into the closet. And then some of you might know the next thing he said, right, which was to shut the door. And to me, that's like quieting the senses, right? Quieting all that chatter, shutting the door on all of that noise, so we can really commune with God, with our own heart and what God is saying. So that's what she did. Her life was really characterized by a deep settled sense of stillness and calm that she brought to everything that she did. So let's now get into sort of the three parts. We'll spend the next half hour or so talking about these three aspects of stillness. So the first one, of being still and finding this healing power of stillness for ourselves. I mentioned that sometimes the hardest thing for me is just remembering to do it. Remembering to stop and pause before I jump into an activity, to think about how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling at that moment, and how my being is part of it. And I think what it means is that no matter how fast we're moving, that at the core of us is that stillness. On the screen, those of you who have computers, you'll see a spinning top. And if you picture this top spinning, at the core of it, if you step back a little bit, it might even look like it's being very still, but it's actually moving really fast. And that image for me is what stillness is like, that even if we're moving quickly, even when we have a lot to accomplish, that at the heart of it is that deep sense of calm. Now, I'll just share a little story with you about this. And I think what I'd like to do first is just open up the chat box again. So if you find your chat, this is the time that you can chat in. And what I'd love to do for those of you that have access to the chat box is just have you, as I'm talking for the next few minutes, chat in what characterizes feeling at peace with yourself. So what is a characteristic for you of really feeling at peace with yourself? So go ahead and chat that in the chat box, and I'll share it with everybody. So for example, for me, when I really know that I'm feeling stillness and I'm really at peace, I'm not so tempted to judge others. That's one characteristic for me of knowing I'm really at peace. I'm not interested in judging others. I'm not so interested in conflict or drama. I'm just feeling really at peace. Devin shared that feeling at peace is like moral freedom. It's exercising my inherent morality. That's really interesting. That's, I think, the first time I've ever had that answer in the last 5 years of doing this talk. That morality, so moral freedom, that's a wonderful idea. That being at peace with ourselves means, I guess what I think about that, Devin, we could probably have an hour-long conversation about it, but to me what it means is we're acting from sort of a moral compass. We're acting out of that center of knowing what's right. And then it gives us the freedom to be ourselves, to really be our best selves. Recently, I actually heard a talk at my child's school last week, and she was talking about freedom and fences, and how she didn't have this analogy, but I have a new puppy at home, and I was thinking about my puppy and how when there's a fence and I know the puppy's safe, I can let my puppy run all over the place because there's a fence keeping the puppy in. And the fence is important because it maintains a space for the puppy to be free. And so we have to have both. So to me, that's kind of what moral freedom is. And I love that sense of that when we're at peace with ourselves, we're keeping our fence, we have that fence, we have that sense of structure in our lives, but within that, there's a great sense of freedom. And so anyway, that's a great sense of it. Someone added that loving justice, God's justice, is a loving sense of justice is what it means to feel at peace with ourselves. And that's interesting that, again, that sense of justice, that when we're at peace with ourselves, I think we accept the conditions of our lives and we're not fighting against them all the time. That sometimes that to me is a sense of divine justice, that we feel that we can't be in the wrong place, that even if we need to make a change in our lives, we're accepting where we are so that we can make that change, as opposed to living kind of feeling always out of sync or that there's some kind of injustice. That's an interesting concept of really feeling a sense of divine justice. Great. Somebody else said feeling at peace is confidence of God's care, being able to be fearless. Thanks, Claire, for that. I love that sense that fearlessness is a sense of being at peace, that we're able to go forward. And even if we kind of see the fear out there or whatever, we don't let it stop us. We kind of go forward despite it, that we're really at peace. We just don't worry about that. Somebody else mentioned, this is a really good one, giving up human will. And they mentioned meekness. Which I love, actually. Meekness, Mary Baker Eddy defined meekness as the armor of a Christian. And I love that because it says meekness is not a weakness, it is a strength. That to be meek and humble, to really set aside sort of willfulness, gives us a sense of strength and power. I just love that concept. Really giving up a sense of human will. And to me, that is also key in being at peace with myself, that I'm willing to let things unfold rather than feeling like I have to control them all the time. And so that's the story I'll share with you briefly. Someone asked if we could say what Claire said again. Sure, I'll repeat that. Claire shared that being at peace feels like confidence in God's care and being able to be fearless, that we have a sense of fearlessness. And the confidence part I didn't mention actually, but I love being at peace gives us a sense of confidence, not in sort of our own abilities, but a confidence that we're connected to a higher sense of purpose, and we have that purpose, and we are the expression of that purpose in a sense, that there's confidence that doesn't come from sort of personality or ego, but that maybe it's that sense of justice we talked about earlier, which I haven't thought about that much, but really that sense of rightness about our life, and that it gives us confidence to know that we have this power of divine love at the heart of everything, that God is at the heart of it. So I'll just share a brief story that kind of relates to stillness for me, and it also relates to the healing aspect of stillness. And it also relates to being really busy. And anybody who knew me in college at the time would have said that I went through the 4 years of college and didn't sleep a wink, although I did. And sometimes I fell asleep in odd places because I was always working and I had way too many classes and this and that. But one of the things that got me through there was one semester where I overloaded on classes because I was double majoring. I wanted to add a triple major and I had a minor. Anyway, I was an overachiever, which I'm not recommending, but at any rate, I had a really heavy load and wanted to do it all. And I also had 2 theses due. So because of my schedule and what I was trying to accomplish in college, I had to write 2 significant undergraduate theses in the same semester. It was not a good plan. I think today, so hopefully nobody would do this, but anyway. And what got me through that really crazy time was that I committed that every single day I would go down. There was this little room in the basement of our like dining hall area, and there was a little quiet study carrel. And you closed the door. It was this heavy, heavy, heavy wood door that was super thick and old and beautiful. And if you closed it, there was literally not a sound that would get through this door. So I would go down into this dark space in the basement, into this little tiny dark study carrel, and I would close the door and I would study the Christian Science Weekly Bible lesson for 15 minutes. And I only gave myself 15 minutes because I didn't have a lot of time. But I took the 15 minutes and I would literally, when I shut that door, I closed the door on everything going on outside of me. And I have to say that 15 minutes was the most profound, quiet, and deep study I think I've ever experienced, because it was completely focused and it was short, and I had to take what I could from that and bring it with me throughout the day and practice it. So on my busiest days, there was that temptation to think I really can't spare this time, but I always did it. And I think that's what got me through that semester and the papers, and I managed it without any troubles. So I think that experience of really committing to stillness is one that has been kind of a thread throughout my life. And about 10 or 15 years ago, I was a mom of 2 kids, and I had a busy practice of individuals in my practice. I was traveling internationally for work, and I had numerous other projects that I was managing, and I had family coming into town for the holidays. And I was also dealing with a strange, chronic, reoccurring pain that would come in my neck and shoulders. And I would get a really stiff neck from sleeping, and I would wake up and it would be uncomfortable, and I would pray about it because that's how I was used to dealing with it. And I didn't know if there was any other solution anyway, but I would really focus prayerfully on wanting to understand the mental nature of this challenge that I was having. And I sort of related it to stress and the pressure I was under, but at any rate, it would sort of alleviate, or I would deal with it and then it would come back. So it would go away and it would come back off and on for a couple of years. And people would say you should get a different bed or different pillow or different this, but I wasn't looking for a cause or a change. And even if I did sleep in a different way or what, it didn't make any difference. It didn't solve the problem. And one particular time when it got really bad, it was right before Christmas. It was 3 days before the holidays. And I felt like I had put so many things on my shoulders. I wanted everything to just be perfect. I just had all this family coming into town. I had this plan for the holidays. I had all these things I wanted to accomplish beforehand. And I just felt if I didn't get it done, if I didn't do it, it wouldn't be done well. And I had to get all these things done. And it was just this frenzied time. And I woke up 3 days before the holidays and my neck was so stiff. And my first thought was, oh no, God, I do not have time for this. I have all these things I have to get done. I have a huge to-do list and I absolutely cannot deal with the pain right now. I have to have a healing right away. So we've got to get on this, and I need to be healed of this pain so I can get on with all the things I have to do. Now, I hope you can hear in that prayer that I was keeping myself kind of at the center of it. It was almost as if I was like calling on God, like I was the CEO of my life, and I'm sort of calling on God to be like my divine assistant to sort of come in and intervene and help me so that I can be healed and get on with my day. Now, I'm not recommending that prayer. Plus, it didn't have any positive effects. I didn't find the relief that I needed. And so by the end of the day, I had even more pain. And then the next day, it was a little bit worse. And by the third day, I was just absolutely in this excruciating pain. I had never had such a difficulty before. And my neck was kind of frozen. I couldn't move it at all. And even walking would send these shooting pains up the back of my spine. So I was forced to stay in bed. And these 3 days when I was supposed to be wrapping the presents and cooking the meal and shopping and getting the house ready and decorating and all of these things that I wanted to get done, plus all my work projects and et cetera, I had not been really accomplishing because I'd been not feeling well. So I was a little frustrated, and now I was in bed and couldn't move, and I was even a little more frustrated and quite discouraged and annoyed and just wanted everything to be so perfect, and I was feeling like it wasn't going to be. And so as I was sitting still and trying to get in a comfortable position and not move. And I realized this was a forced sense of stillness. And I could just see how I'd put everything on my own shoulders. But I didn't know what to do about it. I just didn't know how to get it off, like how to really transform this. But I was willing at this point to start listening more than talking to God. The first time I ever went to Kenya, I used to travel over a period of about 6 years. I traveled to 10 different countries in Africa for my work. And the first time I got to Kenya, a friend of mine there said to me, Laurie, there's a parable we have that we grow up with in Kenya. He said, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I think this is a great application for prayer, that we listen twice as loud as we talk about what we need. What had happened those first 2 days is I was kind of, here's my problem. And I was trying to apply ideas to the problem so that I would hopefully get out a solution that would relieve me of the pain so I could get on with my day. But that didn't work. And so what happened this 3rd day is when I was forced to be quiet, is I started taking all those racing thoughts and really shutting the door on them. And it was hard. It took a few hours of sitting there before I could really honestly feel like I was closing the door on all of the things I wanted to be doing. But as it got shut, I heard this little message kind of come through. And it said, I am the shepherd. And as you can imagine, I was feeling like I was shepherding all these things. And this idea really arrested me in my thought. I thought, well, this is the new idea. So I could feel it as being the sense that, I had read the 23rd Psalm since I was a kid. I knew that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I knew the Psalm by heart. I'd been singing a hymn in the Christian Science Church about shepherd, show me how to go, forever. Of course, it's show me how to go, not where to go or what to go do, but how I should be going, which I hadn't been thinking about either. But anyway, so here I am. I'd been thinking, I knew all of these things, but I hadn't been thinking about the sense of God shepherding me. I'd been thinking about all the things I had to shepherd. Well, as I started to listen to this message of I am the shepherd, that God is the shepherd, I realized that made me a sheep. And then I realized I did not like the idea of being a sheep, that I actually was really biased against being a sheep. Because to me, sheep represented kind of these blind followers. I think I had a teacher in elementary school that actually said, don't ever be a sheep. Now, she was giving good advice about not following your friends blindly when they do stupid stuff. But I think I'd taken it into heart that, I hadn't really valued the sheep qualities. So this is another chance where I'd love to see what you all contribute. So you can open your chat box again. And the question is, what are the sheep qualities? What are the qualities of being a sheep if there's a divine shepherd? What does it look like? So what do sheep represent in terms of qualities that we can be living that acknowledge this sense of God as the shepherd? So if God's the shepherd and we're sheep with God as the shepherd, what qualities do sheep have that we can be expressing? So Devin shared innocence, inoffensiveness. Of course, that's from Mary Baker Eddy. And I think the words that come to me about innocence are that they don't have their own agenda, right? That's a very innocent thing. That the sheep aren't saying, can I lead today? Can I be in charge instead? They're willing to not be in charge. Inoffensiveness, that they're gentle, they're not aggressive, they're not pushy, they're not trying to make their way. They're just following where the shepherd leads them. Linda says, sheep are being obedient to good directions. Yes, that's very true. And to do that, they have to listen. Did you know that sheep are actually able to recognize and pick out their shepherd's voice from other voices? They can hear their shepherd's voice. So they hear the good directions because they know the voice of their shepherd better than anything else. Devin added, sheep are honest. They won't lie down if they don't feel safe. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I did know that they won't drink unless the water is still. So yeah, they have a real authentic sense of themselves, don't they? That if they don't have the right conditions, they know their safety, they will not drink, right? But they're also trusting that shepherd to find them the still waters, or to find them that safe place so they can lie down. And the shepherd knows how to care for them that way. So I'm sure there's more things you all are thinking about, but these qualities of the sheep were things I started to think about that day when I was struggling. And what I could see is that it still means that we have to still shepherd in our lives. We shepherd our kids or our projects or our church groups or whatever things we might be in charge of. But it's really how we're doing it that I hadn't been focusing on. And I had been kind of taking on the shepherding role and feeling like, again, like God was sort of like my second in charge shepherd, as opposed to feeling the shepherding from God that would allow me to then be the outcome of that shepherding in my life. That each one of us is the outcome of what God is doing. Our being is the result of God's doing. And so we get the chance then to focus more on our being than on what we do. And I think that for me, at least, what that means, it was like that 15 minutes in that dark little study corner in my college university where I was, that I was focused just on spiritual ideas for 15 minutes. I wasn't thinking about what I had to do next. I wasn't even specifically praying about a project or anything else. I was just immersing myself, kind of like immersing myself in these sheep qualities in bed this one day. And that immersion in that sense of our being and how we want to be. Well, what happened this day when I was in bed is I slowly felt my whole body just relax. And the pain went away as well. And I was able to move my head again. And by the end of the day, I was able to go down and rejoin the family. But I didn't rejoin the family and kind of take charge again, because I had had this really transformative moment where I stopped feeling in charge, where I felt like life was a response to God being in charge, to this sense that within us there is, that we are so connected, we're so at one with God, that there's no separation, there's no distinction. And it's only that we forget about that oneness and we start taking it all on ourselves that we forget that shepherding quality. And just one more point on this before we go on to the second part, which we'll have to quickly do the last two parts here. But the last point about this for me is that when we're thinking about healing, that the stillness is what connects us to that oneness. When we get really still, we feel that sense of oneness. And in that moment, we're not problem solving our healings. We're not taking a problem and trying to add or sort of find ideas in the Bible or science and health that we add to the problem so that we get a solution. And sometimes that's kind of how I started the healing work, but it didn't have an effect those first 2 days. The third day, what happened was I forgot about the problem. I wasn't praying about a stiff neck. I wasn't praying about stiff shoulders. I wasn't praying about nerves or ligaments or the challenge or whatever it was. And I wasn't even specifically praying about the burden or the stress or the pressure. I was listening, and I was just quieting the senses. And I was filling up with that vision we talked about. Remember how we shared those qualities of being at peace with ourselves? Having that vision, to me, is what healing is about. That we want to get a vision of what we're looking for. That peace and healing is not just about getting rid of a problem. It's nice. We want the problem to go away. But it's actually a tenet also in peace building work when I was working in conflict resolution, that peace is not the absence of conflict. Not only the absence of conflict. A ceasefire helps to get peace, but that doesn't create peace. That peace is an active, palpable presence of community, and there's whole lists of qualities of what constitutes peace in a community, but it's an active presence of something. It's not just an absence of a problem or a conflict. And sometimes I think we get in the mode of problem solving our healings to try to get rid of something, when what we're forgetting is we're wanting to gain a whole new vision of our relationship to God and divine love. And that's what I gained in that experience. And not only was I healed in that day, but the chronic reoccurring stiff neck thing never came back. It stopped coming back because I no longer woke up in my morning thinking, here's all the things I have to do, God, help me with it. That all went away. And I would wake up in the morning thinking, okay, God, what do you have in store for today? And it's still something I try to practice when I wake up in the morning early. So a whole mind shift, that's what creates the healing. And it's in those moments when we get really still that we lose the consciousness of the problem. And that's where healing happens. Okay, we got to move on. On the screen, you see a little cartoon. And for those of you on the phone, there's a shepherd and there's some sheep in a pasture and there's a little sheep on a cell phone. And the bottom of the cartoon says, you can't unfollow me. I'm your shepherd, referring to Facebook, if any of you are on Facebook. But I just thought this was funny that the sheep can't actually disconnect from the shepherd, that they're always in the fold, that's our relationship to God. And we'll just close off this section about ourselves with this idea from Mary Baker Eddy. She says, to the burdened and weary, Jesus saith, come unto me. There remaineth a rest for the righteous, a rest in Christ, a peace in love. The thought of it stills complaint. The heaving surf of life's troubled sea foams itself away, and underneath is a deep settled calm. Love that image of the deep settled calm, that no matter what might be raging on the surface, no matter whether it's in our bodies, whether it's pain, whether it's in our minds, something we're grappling with, whether it's a relationship, that as we go deeper, that we can find that stillness is there. It's always there. It's not something we have to gain. It's not something we don't even have to do anything to make the stillness happen. It's not what we think. It's not an idea we're applying. It's that we're tuning into it. That's already present. All right, so let's go on to the second story, second part about being still and finding this healing power of stillness for our relationships with others. And to me, what is sort of the fundamental idea here for me is what Paul was teaching when Jesus was no longer around and Paul was traveling around and writing letters and doing all of his teaching ministry. And he said in so many different ways to all the different people he taught, he said, you have the mind of Christ. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Now, this is another opportunity. Thank you for your comment, Devin. That's great. I see your comment in the chat here. So you can open your chat box again. And this is sort of the last time you can chat in our talk here today. But the question is, what does it look like for you to have the mind of Christ? What does that mean? And it means so many different things to me at different times. But often in the Bible, before Jesus went in and healed somebody, he paused. And I don't know what he was thinking, but he didn't just rush in and react to the situation in front of him. He paused, and I just don't imagine him ever being hurried or anxious about anything. But the mind of Christ enables us not to feel anxious or reactive, to not live in reaction to others. So that's one, I think, characteristic of the mind of Christ. Great. Someone chatted in. I think it means looking outward. Not having the mind of Christ means looking inward at oneself. Oh, that's interesting, Devin. So, yeah. So what I get from what you're saying, Devin, is that the mind of Christ is not self-absorbed. That it keeps us from being self-absorbed. And the opposite of self-absorption, of course, is sort of feeling connected to humanity, feeling like we have a connection to others and that it's a useful one, that we can act on it. And I love that. That's a great sense of things, because sometimes I think, especially, stillness is practiced in many schools in America today. There's lots of mindfulness practice. I think it has lots of good to it. I really enjoy talking with people about different meditative practices and mindfulness practices. And I think a lot of it is really, again, getting awareness of the bigger connection, through this oneness of mind that I love to think about in Christian Science. But I do want to just make that distinction that it's not about sort of a self-help tool, right? That stillness is not about like navel gazing, right? It's not about like just looking at ourselves and constantly being in self-improvement, because that's not actually the usefulness. That stillness actually helps us to put off a sense of ourself, to get beyond our ego, to really connect with that bigger sense of divine mind. That the mind of Christ feels like a connection through soul. And somebody said infinite individuality, the one mind. That what that one mind says is that the information we get about other people's behavior doesn't come from their behavior. It comes from that mind of Christ. So years and years and years ago, long time ago, when I was a new mom, one of my younger sisters, who didn't have kids at the time, loved to come over and see me with my new child, my new son. And I was such an avid parent. I wanted to do everything right. And I read all the parenting books and I was working so hard at it. And she would notice something and she would kind of tell me how I should do it better. So she'd give me parenting advice. Now, maybe this, this sort of makes sense, because sometimes it is the people who don't have kids that actually can see things in a different light. But at the time, my first reaction was, she doesn't have kids. How does she know? What does she know about raising kids? So I would dismiss her comment, and we'd kind of created a little bit of a sort of a conflict between us. It was a little tense, and we'd always had a really great relationship. But I got a little defensive, and I was feeling a little bit like, who is she to tell me how to parent, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would find myself, when she would come over, I would start to kind of armor myself up a little bit, like, okay, I'm going to defend myself better this time. I'm going to convince her I'm a good parent better this time, or whatever. I'm going to defend myself in a way that she no longer feels she has to give me advice, whatever it was. Well, this went on like this for a while, and I felt quite tense and anxious, and we had this conflict, and it wasn't very fun. And one day I was praying about this idea of the mind of Christ. And the idea that was so clear to me was that the Christ in us corresponds to the Christ in others. So I wanted to see how that worked. So the next time she came over, I just paused before I responded the next time she gave me advice about parenting. And I was listening for that Christ idea. And an idea came to me, and I shared it with her, and she started laughing. And I knew this was the mind of Christ, because neither of us had a good sense of humor at the time. This was years ago. And so the fact that we all of a sudden were saying something funny was clearly beyond either of us and our own personalities. So to me, and I'm realizing our time is getting low here, so I'm just going to conclude this section and move on to the last one about the world, because somehow our time just flew by in this wonderful chat with you all. The mind of Christ enables us to not live in reaction to others. It says that we get divine messages from God that speak to our consciousness, that we get information about others, not from how they behave, but directly from what God says. And it enables us to be good-humored and relaxed, and not to armor up and not to get tense, but to really break the cycle of the pattern of reaction that we tend to live in with others. That it allows us to lose that self-absorption and to respond to the Christ in the other person. And with my sister, I have to say, she never stopped giving me parenting advice. She still does to this day, actually, which is fine. But I lost the defensiveness and the tendency to react. And actually, I could listen, and I could take from her advice what was useful and really put it into practice, and not feel self-justified that I shouldn't be getting it from her. I could really take what was useful from it. I think what's key about this is that the stillness allows us to pause before we respond to someone else. It breaks the cycle of reaction, so we can feel the mind of Christ working in us and in others. Mary Baker Eddy puts it this way. She said, mind revolves on a spiritual axis, and its power is displayed and its presence felt in eternal stillness and immovable love. Okay, wow, it's really late. So I'm going to say, as we go on, I'm going to finish up with part 3 here. If you have any questions, go ahead and You can start chatting them in the question and answer box. You can type in your questions. I'll be happy to answer them at the end. I'll just stay on for a few more minutes. But I just want to conclude and end tonight with just a couple of stories, because I think being still in light of world events is also really key. I know for myself that I can hear something on the news and it can either breed agitation or dismay or discouragement or frustration or anger. On any given day, it could be any kind of emotion. And it's so quick, it just happens. I hear something and you get pulled down the current of thought into a conclusion that you may not really want to have, but that's where you feel like you are. And so there's a couple of stories and analogies that I've used to really think about practicing stillness so we don't get kind of sucked down that current of thought so easily, so quickly. The first one actually is just a story that comes from the first time I went whitewater rafting, which was a couple of years ago now. And a friend of mine was guiding the boat and she was teaching us how to read the river. And when you whitewater raft, you're paddling through the rapids. And it's difficult to navigate and it's hard and it takes a lot of effort sometimes. And so she was teaching us how after you get through the rapids that you look for the eddies in the river. And the eddies are the still places. When you're in an eddy, you can rest your oars and you don't have to put an anchor down or anything. You can be totally still and the current will not pull you because there's no current in the eddy. It's just a still place that swirls. The eddy is formed by a rock that's rooted in the bedrock of the river. And just upstream from that rock, there's this little swirly still place. And if you're in that place, you can't get pulled by the current. And I love this analogy that the eddies in thought are those still places. That every effort we make to get still, to find that connection to being still, that oneness with God, that when we hear something in the news that dismays us or worries us or concerns us or agitates us, that when we go right back to finding that stillness, that connection with stillness, it's like sitting in that eddy and we're not getting pulled with the current down so quickly downstream into the conclusion that things are hopeless or a disaster or there's no solution for problems. That in that eddy, we can hear an inspiration from God that might be part of a solution. And that's a useful thing to do. All right, the second story is about the canary in the waterfall. And this is, it was a contest for children to draw what they thought peace looked like. And children drew all their pictures and they sent it into this peace building organization. And the winning picture was a child that had drawn a rushing, roaring waterfall that was spilling all over rocks and tumbling down below. And if you've ever been near a waterfall like this, it's not a quiet place. It's really loud and there's lots of noise and turbulence. But right behind the waterfall, on a little rock ledge, was a yellow canary. And the child had drawn the canary as singing. Now, I hope this image brings you some kind of image about stillness and peace. And we don't have time to go into all those right now, although I'd love to hear what it speaks to you about. But what I hear in it, and there's many things, but there's a couple things. One is that the canary is doing what it was designed to do. It's singing. Now, a canary's voice is very small, and the waterfall is really loud. So the canary probably wasn't being heard by anybody, but it wasn't singing to be heard by anybody. It was just singing to sing. And the canary wasn't concerned about the waterfall. It also wasn't being sucked into the waterfall. It was standing on a rock ledge, so it was rooted on something solid. But it was doing what it was designed to do. And I think that's what makes us useful for the world, that stillness is about not getting into the churned up news that's spilling over us, not getting pulled down the current of the river, but rooting ourselves in that still place like the eddy or on that rock ledge and finding our voice that we can contribute. And it doesn't mean we don't, stand up and really speak our mind about things, but it comes from a place of being at peace. And then we become part of the solution for the world. And the final story that I'll share with you is something that I heard years ago when I was 20. There was a woman who came to give a talk at my university, and she had lived in Germany during the time of the Berlin Wall. And she told us that she prayed every single day for 10 years straight for the wall to come down. Now, I was 20, so this was half my lifetime that this woman prayed every day, and that had a profound impact on me. I could not imagine what would allow somebody to pray that long without seeing any results. And so I went up to her afterwards and I just asked her that question. I said, I'm so impressed by your story. I said, but that's a significant amount of time to pray for something without seeing results. I said, what kept you going? And I'll never forget her answer. She said to me, the wall came down in a moment, but it was not the work of a moment. It was the work of all the moments beforehand that changed thought. And then she said to me, and what do you think changes thought? And she said that her prayer, what would happen for her is that every time she prayed, she could feel the mental shift happening. She could feel the mental blocks that were keeping the division there, chipping away little by little. And that's what kept her going. And she said that it took shifting those mental blocks, and then the wall came down. And what I love about this for the world is that when we get still and go into that eddy or that still place, or we find our voice like the canary and we don't get stuck in the waterfall, but we stay near it and we watch it, but we're not getting blown over by it. And we pray and we get still, that every prayer is contributing to the progress of humanity. It's chipping away at those blocks that are holding together the violence that seems to keep perpetuating itself in America through guns, or it chips away at the seemingly intractable conflict in Syria, or it chips away at some of the other kinds of issues that we see in the world, whether it's with politics or with government or with local issues in our own communities, whatever it might be that concerns us. I know Brexit right now, if folks are, anyone's in England, I know they've been in this sense of complexity. We're coming up on the deadline for Brexit and everybody is having a hard time seeing a solution. But every time we get to that place of stillness, we're contributing mentally to this like mental landscape that is chipping away at the intractable nature of what seems intractable, what seems like a lack of solution. We're chipping away at that, chipping away at the blocks that are holding that together and bringing the solution forward, because it's a mental shift that has to happen first. So every single prayer contributes to that mental shift, and none is wasted. Not one prayer is wasted. That it goes out mentally and it starts to chip away at the mental blocks that need to be chipped away. And that's what I learned from that woman's story. And I'll just close with this idea from Mary Baker Eddy. She says that the best spiritual type of Christly method for uplifting human thought and imparting divine truth is stationary power, stillness, and strength. And when this spiritual ideal is made our own, it becomes the model for human action. That as we make this ideal of stillness our own, it creates a model for human action. That if every single one of us tonight on this call, or on any of whoever's hearing this webinar later on, that if we commit to practicing stillness in our lives, to handling the stress for ourselves, to not living in reaction to other people in our relationships, and really working on feeling that Christ mind that connects us to each one's heart. And that if we look at the world and rather than turning away in apathy or getting frustrated or discouraged, that we go into that eddy, that mental place where we find that stillness, we're contributing to bringing that forward to the world and to letting those solutions be found. Okay, thank you all for being such an attentive audience for the last hour. We've been talking about the healing power of stillness according to Christian Science. I'm Laurie Snorek, and I enjoyed being with you during this hour. I'll stay on for about another 5 or 10 minutes. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead and put them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to answer them at any point. So if if you need to leave, thank you. And if otherwise, I will be happy to stay on and answer your questions for a few minutes. Thanks so much.